A police officer was driving home after a long shift when he noticed a small puppy chasing his car, determined not to fall behind. At first, he thought it was just a lost stray, but when he finally stopped and looked closer at its worn collar, his breath caught. Tucked inside was a crumpled note, the edges stained with something dark. The moment he read the words, everything changed. What shocking truth did this puppy bring with it? And how did one simple decision change everything? We'd love to know, where are you watching from today? Share in the comments and join us as we journey through this story together. May it bless your heart. Let's get started. Chapter 1. A Night Like No Other. The city of Chicago lay under a cold, silent night. The streets mostly deserted except for the occasional passing car. Officer Ethan Carter rubbed his tired eyes as he guided his patrol car down the nearly empty road, eager to get home. Another exhausting 12-hour shift filled with domestic disputes, noise complaints and paperwork. Nothing out of the ordinary, until he noticed it. A small, scruffy puppy was chasing his car. Ethan frowned, glancing in the rearview mirror again. The dog was struggling to keep up, its tiny paws hitting the pavement with everything it had. Most strays gave up after a few steps, but this one didn't. It wasn't just wandering, it was following him with purpose. Ethan sighed and pulled over, expecting the puppy to lose interest. But as soon as he stepped out of the car, it skidded to a stop a few feet away, panting hard, its brown eyes locked onto him. Up close, the dog looked worse than he had thought. Its thin frame suggested it had been hungry for a while. A small cut near its front paw showed signs of struggle. But what really caught Ethan's attention was the collar around its neck. It was old, worn, and something was tucked inside it. Ethan crouched down, reaching out slowly. The puppy flinched at first but didn't run. It just stood there, waiting. His fingers carefully pulled out a crumpled, folded piece of paper wedged into the collar. It was stained dark at the edges, and the handwriting inside was uneven, almost shaky. Ethan unfolded it under the dim glow of a streetlight and read the words. "Officer, help. The boy won't cry. The boy won't cry anymore. 2429 South Greenwood." Ethan's pulse quickened. What did that mean? Was a child in danger? He reached for his radio. "Dispatch, this is Officer Carter. I need a check on an address. 2429 South Greenwood. Any open cases linked to that location?" A short pause. Then the dispatcher's voice crackled back. "Negative, Carter. No active reports or priors associated with that address. No records, no past complaints, nothing suspicious. So why did this feel so wrong?" Ethan looked down at the puppy. It wasn't leaving. It wasn't running. It had brought him here. Something about this note felt urgent, desperate. And the fact that it was delivered this way by a stray dog only made it more unsettling. Ethan clenched his jaw and slid the note into his pocket. He turned back toward his patrol car. "All right, buddy," he muttered. "Let's go see what's waiting for us." He opened the door, but the puppy didn't wait for an invitation. It jumped onto the sidewalk and ran ahead, as if leading him. Ethan followed. As he turned onto South Greenwood, a strange heaviness settled in his chest. The apartment buildings ahead loomed in the darkness, their worn exteriors barely illuminated by flickering streetlights. 2429 South Greenwood. The address sat in the middle of a block of older buildings, its front door barely visible under the dim glow of a porch light. No sounds, no movement, just silence. Ethan parked and stepped out. The puppy trotted forward without hesitation, paws scratching at the front steps. He placed a hand on his holster as he approached the door. Something about this didn't feel right. Taking a breath, he raised a fist and knocked. No response. Another knock. Still nothing. Ethan reached for his radio again, ready to call it in. But as he glanced down, he saw the puppy still staring at the door, waiting. Was there someone inside? Was there a boy inside? And if there was, why wouldn't he cry? Chapter 2. Apartment 2429. The building smelled of dust, damp wood, and something stale. Ethan climbed the cracked steps, his hand instinctively resting on his holster. The dim hallway light flickered above, casting long, uneasy shadows. Ahead of him, the puppy didn't slow down. It ran straight up the stairs, paws barely making a sound against the worn linoleum. It didn't hesitate, didn't sniff around like a confused stray. It knew exactly where it was going. Ethan followed, his boots heavier than usual, as he moved toward the second floor. The hallway was narrow, walls lined with peeling wallpaper, the kind that had once been cheerful, but now looked like it belonged to a forgotten past. At the very end, apartment 2429. Ethan stopped in front of the door. The number was barely hanging on, the brass digits tarnished and loose. The door was shut, but not properly. The frame looked slightly off, as if it had been forced before and never repaired. And then there was the silence. Ethan knocked firmly. "Chicago PD, anyone inside?" No answer. He knocked again, harder this time, his voice sharpened. "Police! If anyone's in there, identify yourself." Nothing. Then a noise, not loud, not obvious, but something. A shuffling sound, like someone moving carefully, slowly, like they didn't want to be heard. The puppy, silent up until now, suddenly stiffened. Then it lunged. A low, guttural growl escaped its throat as it clawed at the door, barking sharply. It wasn't afraid. It was trying to get in. Ethan's heart pounded against his ribs. He had learned to trust instincts, both his own and those of animals. This dog knew something, and whatever was inside that apartment, it wasn't right. Ethan stepped back, hand tightening around his holstered gun. His radio crackled to life. "Carter, status? Possible disturbance inside 2429 South Greenwood. No response, but there's movement. Backup is en route. ETA 7 minutes. 7 minutes. Too long." Ethan looked at the door again. The puppy was still clawing, scratching, desperate. Every second felt like an hour. Something inside that apartment wasn't just waiting, and it was hiding. Ethan inhaled sharply. No more waiting. One step back, a firm stance. Then, with one powerful kick, the door burst open. As the wood splintered and the room inside was revealed, Ethan's breath caught. What was he about to walk into? Chapter 3. The Boy Who Wouldn't Cry. The moment the door gave way, Ethan stepped inside, his hand firm on his holster, senses on high alert. The air was thick with the scent of something stale, mixed with a metallic tang he recognized instantly. Blood. The apartment was barely furnished. Just a couch pushed against one wall, a table covered in scattered papers, and a broken lamp lying on the floor. But none of that mattered. His eyes locked on the body sprawled near the center of the room. A woman. Face pale, lips parted slightly, eyes half open but seeing nothing. A dark wound marred her forehead, blood dried in a cruel halo around her head. Her body was stiff, lifeless, dead. Ethan's pulse pounded, but it wasn't the corpse that made his stomach twist. It was the boy. He sat against the far wall, his back pressed into the peeling wallpaper, legs folded underneath him. He couldn't have been older than 9. His arms wrapped protectively around something. Someone. A baby. Tiny, fragile, alive, but barely. Ethan took a step forward, his throat tightening. Why wasn't the boy crying? Most kids this age in this situation would be sobbing, wailing, screaming, but this boy... He was silent. His wide eyes stared at the dead woman, unblinking, empty. Ethan exhaled slowly, forcing his voice to stay calm. "Hey, kid," he said carefully. "Are you okay?" No response. The puppy broke the silence, darting past Ethan's legs. It ran straight to the boy, pressing its body against him, licking at his face, his hands, his arms, desperate for a reaction. But the boy didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't blink. His hands held onto the baby, but there was no tension, no warmth in his touch, just stillness. Ethan crouched down, keeping his movements slow. "What's your name, buddy?" he tried again. The boy's eyes didn't leave the woman's body. His lips parted, and when he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Jamie." Ethan nodded. "Okay, Jamie, my name's Ethan. I'm a police officer." The boy didn't react to that either. Ethan's gaze flickered to the baby in his arms. The infant was weak, its tiny chest rising and falling in shallow, unsteady breaths. Dehydrated, hungry, barely holding on. They needed medical attention, fast. Ethan reached for his radio, but then Jamie spoke again. His voice was flat, emotionless. She said if I didn't cry, everything would be okay. Ethan froze. Jamie's hands tightened around the baby, but his face remained blank. I didn't cry, Jamie murmured, finally looking up at Ethan. And for the first time, Ethan saw the depth of something deeply broken behind those eyes. But everything still isn't okay. A shiver ran down Ethan's spine. What had this boy been through? Chapter 4. The Mystery Behind Jamie. The ambulance cut through the quiet night, sirens wailing as it sped toward Chicago General Hospital. Ethan sat in the back, his eyes alternating between Jamie, the baby, and the dog, curled protectively at the boy's feet. Jamie didn't speak, didn't move, didn't react as the paramedics worked quickly to stabilize the baby in his arms. Even when they gently took the infant away to attach an IV, Jamie barely blinked. His expression remained eerily empty. The only time he stirred was when someone tried to separate him from the puppy. The moment a nurse reached for the dog, it growled, a deep warning sound that sent a clear message. Jamie gripped the puppy's fur tightly, his first real movement since leaving the apartment. Ethan stepped in. Let the dog stay, he told the nurse. He's not going anywhere. The nurse hesitated, but a single glance at Jamie, at the way he clung to the small animal like a lifeline, was enough to convince her. She nodded and backed off. Max, the dog, settled at Jamie's feet, eyes locked on him, watching, guarding. Ethan had seen service dogs and K9 units act like this before, but Max wasn't trained. He was just a stray. So why was he so protective of Jamie? Hospital records and the first clue. After ensuring that both boys were in safe hands, Ethan stepped out of the emergency ward and made his way to the nurse's station. He needed answers. The hospital records had Jamie listed under his mother's name, but something about it felt off. The details were vague. There was no record of a birth at any Chicago hospital, just a single admittance from 6 years ago when Jamie was treated for a head injury. That's when a doctor approached him. Dr. Miller, a middle-aged man with kind but observant eyes, glanced down at the file in his hands. You're the officer who brought the boy in? Ethan nodded. Yeah. What do you have? Dr. Miller flipped the chart open. Jamie has a small scar at the base of his neck. Old, but definitely surgical. Ethan frowned. From what? We're not sure. There's no record of any procedure being done at this hospital. Could be from an accident or a previous surgery from another city. Something about that didn't sit right. You said he was admitted 6 years ago, Ethan asked. Dr. Miller nodded. Head trauma, minor concussion, no signs of long-term damage, but he hesitated, then added, From what I can tell, this kid has been through a lot, more than just one injury. Ethan's stomach tightened. If Jamie had been treated for a head injury before, was it connected to his current behavior? To why he didn't cry? Or was there something else? The DNA test. Ethan made a decision. He pulled a few strings and requested a DNA test between Jamie and the deceased woman. He knew it wasn't standard procedure, but something about this case didn't feel standard. Maybe it was a gut feeling. Maybe it was the way Jamie looked at that woman's body, detached, as if he had always known this day would come. It took less than 24 hours for the results to come back. Ethan opened the sealed envelope, heart pounding as he read the words that changed everything. Jamie was not biologically related to the woman. She wasn't his mother. She had never been. Ethan exhaled sharply, gripping the edge of the counter. If she wasn't his mother, then who was? And who had taken him before he was old enough to remember? Chapter 5. The Dog That Wouldn't Leave. The days that followed were filled with questions. Detectives came and went, nurses checked Jamie's vitals. Social workers tried to talk to him, but nothing broke through. He didn't cry. He didn't flinch. He sat silently in his hospital bed, staring at the window, detached from everything around him, everything except the dog. Max refused to leave Jamie's side. The hospital tried to enforce their no pets policy. Staff gently suggested taking Max to a shelter or keeping him outside, but the moment someone tried to separate them, Jamie reacted. His small hands clutched Max's fur, pulling the dog against him like a shield. His breathing would quicken, his fingers digging in, his body suddenly tense and alert. The only time Jamie showed any emotion at all was when Max was in danger of being taken away. The first real reaction. Ethan had been watching. He saw how Jamie didn't flinch when doctors examined him, how he didn't react when social workers asked about his home, his mother, his past. But when someone reached for Max, even just to adjust the leash, Jamie's grip would tighten, his body tensing like a cornered animal. One evening, Ethan finally sat down beside him. "Jamie," he said gently, "do you know this dog?" For the first time since the night in the apartment, Jamie moved. It was subtle, a slight nod, barely noticeable, but it was a response. Ethan leaned forward. "Did you have him before?" Jamie hesitated, then nodded again. His fingers twisted into Max's fur, his first real display of emotion. "My mum," he said softly. His voice was quiet, but Ethan could hear the weight behind it. "She said I couldn't keep him," Jamie continued, his words slow, careful. "But he always came back." Max let out a small whine, pressing against Jamie's side. Jamie finally looked up, and for the first time there was something in his expression. Not emptiness, not silence, something fragile, something real. "I named him Max." Ethan exhaled slowly, the pieces starting to fit together. This wasn't just a random dog that had followed Jamie that night. Max had always been there. He had come back over and over, refusing to stay away, and now he was the only thing left in Jamie's world. Ethan's grip tightened on the chair as a thought settled in his mind, one that wouldn't let go. Had Max been trying to protect Jamie all along? Chapter 6. A warning from a stranger. Ethan sat in his patrol car, parked just outside the station, reviewing the latest reports on Jamie's case. The DNA test had confirmed what he suspected. Jamie wasn't biologically related to the woman who raised him. So who was he? Where did he really come from? His gut told him that something about this case wasn't just a tragedy, it was something bigger. That's when his phone rang. Unknown number. He hesitated for a moment before answering. "Carter." At first there was silence, then a voice, low, calm, and unsettlingly confident. "Dungai di, Carter. Thangbi kong thuok vengoi punu do, vano kong thuok ve an, no thuok vengoi kak." Ethan's blood ran cold. His grip tightened on the phone. "Who is this?" Click. The line went dead. Ethan immediately scanned his surroundings, a deep sense of unease creeping over him. Someone was watching him, someone who knew he was investigating, someone who wanted him to stop. His instincts screamed at him. This wasn't just a random warning, this was a threat. Ethan slammed the car into gear and sped toward the hospital. Back at the hospital. By the time Ethan reached Jamie's room, his heart was pounding. The hospital lights buzzed softly above, casting a pale glow over the quiet hallways. He pushed open the door and stopped. Jamie was still in the hospital bed, sitting up, arms wrapped around Max. The boy's small fingers ran through the dog's fur, over and over, as if grounding himself. He was whispering, talking to Max in a soft, barely audible voice. Ethan took a careful step inside. The floor creaked beneath his boot. Jamie looked up immediately, and then, for the first time since he had been rescued, the boy spoke first. His voice was small but clear. "Chu kong da I lay Max di dung kong?" Ethan felt something in his chest tighten. He crouched down beside the bed, meeting the boy's eyes, eyes that had seen too much. "No," he said firmly. "Chu hua." He let the words settle, watching Jamie's expression, his hands still gripping Max. Then he added, voice steady, unwavering, "Va chu kong kong de I lai chao di." Jamie didn't answer right away, but for the first time his shoulders relaxed just a little. And Ethan knew someone was coming for this boy. The truth remains hidden beneath layers of mystery. Who is Jamie truly? Why did the woman who raised him keep his identity a secret? Who was behind the warning call to Ethan? And what are they so desperate to hide? And why doesn't Jamie cry? Is it the weight of trauma, or was he taught never to show emotion? Then there's Max, the loyal dog who kept returning to Jamie no matter how many times he was turned away. Was it simple devotion, or was he protecting Jamie from something more? Part 2 will continue this emotional and gripping journey, a story of trust, survival, and the incredible bond between a boy, a cop, and the dog that never gave up. Comment, 1 inch if you want to uncover the truth. God bless you all.